One of the best sensations I ever had was opening the dev box that the publisher sent me with this.
You mentioned bosses, right? What makes the perfect boss in a Metroidvania? So when you're making mobile applications and you move that into actual game development, I'd imagine some of the software is similar, some of the approaches are similar, but what's the tangible things you can take from there and then move them into game development?
The way to approach games and to develop games even is completely different from any other kind of software that I've worked before. It was a big shock, and I think that I'm still too programmed to work on stuff like mobile applications, websites, and desktop applications than to make games. Software in general is structured chaos, and games it's chaos without the structural part. The structure stuff in games, because we don't control the entire flow of the game itself. It's just chaos, pure chaos, and we have to manage that chaos and try to structure it a bit, but you can only do that on a small scale, never on the entire project.
Jumping way ahead before we go way back again, when the game released, kind of what was the reception on it, right? Did it go off the way you had planned? Was it better than you had anticipated? Was there more bug fixes that needed to be done than you had kind of scheduled? Like, because I know you said, let's just get it out. What did that entail from your guys' end?
With the release, we always knew that it wouldn't be the release that we thought, especially since it's an early access game, it's a Metroidvania game. That early access and Metroidvania doesn't match too well. People don't like early access titles for obvious reasons. So we knew that the release, sales-wise, would never meet our expectations. The sales part and the business part was terrible. The reception was awesome.
I'd imagine from when you started to now, that engine has evolved, has changed. So how did you get past those hurdles where the engine slowly was building and growing and like it was doing patches and all this stuff? I'd imagine that impacts development from a technical standpoint.
So the first rule of any software project is never update. That's the first rule. Pick a version and stick to it.
Is that what you guys did?
Of course, no. We can't do it because some console platforms require you to be at least at a specific Unity version to release it. So when that time comes, we have to update. So I think we updated Oirbo 2 times, and every time we did one of those updates, I think it was 2 weeks of work to put everything back together. So it wasn't too bad from the stories I've heard.
You had mentioned you're the software engineer behind the game. So is it like building the NPC mechanics and making them functional within the game that's the hardest part? Like what's the most difficult aspect of this game?
Consistency and coherence is the most difficult thing, because you want to give our players a particular experience. When I'm drawing a section of an area, for instance, I have very specific goals of what I want the player to feel and what I want the player to discover and how he should progress that section, even though players simply disregard my intentions and do what they want. I try to have some goals and points. So every section that was designed there are of course those sections that are just resting areas where there is no challenge or enemies, just something just to relax a bit before the next action sequence. But I always try to do that and try to convey and play around with the mechanics that each area has. But the issue is it's not easy to do level design. I'm not, like I said, I'm a software developer. What I know of level design is from what I've played, what I've read, what I've listened and watched. So we basically have a strict set of rules of what we want in each section and try to follow through on all sections as much as we can. The biggest hurdle of designing any section in Oirbo is the fact that we have a big one. It's the rule number 1, that is the player can do this section no matter the direction that he's coming from. So imagine a simple horizontal section where you came from the left and the exit was on the right. They can come and go from either way, and that is the most difficult part.
How do you handle stuff like pacing in a game like this?
For every area that we do, I usually do a golden path or a developer path. That is what I expect the normal player to do. And I always work around that. What I basically do after I do what I call the golden path, I try to do little side paths that follow the same rules, where you have, for instance, a puzzle section, then a combat section, then a section for rest. And I try to do that in like a tree where everything branches off from what I think is going to be the most common way that the player will going to play. But you can literally go anywhere. So after you collect the first power-up, which is a dash, you can visit all the areas of the game.
With that, I mean, how do you approach the UI then in that case? They have the ability to do basically go wherever they want, really, but you also want to have some semblance of like direction, right, where they feel kind of guided if they want to be. And even like with that in mind, I guess one thing that jumped out for me instantly with your game was you really don't have dialogue in your game, which makes localization within your UI like a game changer, really. So kind of walk me through those different steps as you were creating this game.
I honestly don't know where that decision came from. I think that Oirbo, the main goal that you have besides the exploring is to defeat the bosses. And we make sure that we have a bunch of signs pointing out not directly to where the boss is, but necessarily where you should be or where you should go to defeat the boss. We use the classical jump on top of the head of the enemy and you will kill it.
Mario style.
Mario style, yeah.
I like it, okay.
We wanted to make a Metroidvania, but not the combat-focused Metroidvania.
You mentioned bosses, right? What makes the perfect boss in a Metroidvania?
I know that bosses are the thing that makes or breaks sometimes games, but I think bosses are pretty much irrelevant in the Metroidvania, because what I expect from a Metroidvania game is exploration. Although not the same thing. It's like when you play Zelda not because the dungeons necessary. You play it because you want to enjoy the world. And for me, playing Metroidvania is exactly the same. We want to check out the world, see what we have to uncover, find its secrets, and that's what you want. The bosses are basically something that you have to prove to the game developer that you are ready for the next thing. When we design the bosses, we take the usual rules in consideration, that we have basically two means of designing a boss. Either we design the boss of the area before we design the enemies, or the other way around. So if we design the boss first, the enemies of the area will be basically remove the boss mechanics and implement them uniquely for an enemy. If we implement the enemies first, the boss will be just a collection of all those mechanics presented to the player.
Talk to me about the game itself, right? The game world, the character, the gameplay mechanics, things like that. Just dive into that a little bit for me.
When you start the game, you are in a spacecraft where no human is to be seen, but if you explore enough, you will find out where they are. And there is a conflict of powers inside the spacecraft. Basically, without spoiling too much, is basically that. We have a conflict inside there. Oirbo has a tragic story. That's pretty much it. Story-wise, it's a very simple, nothing too crazy. We developed a thing that we call the story logs, which are basically fragments of the story that are presented via like a comic strip, animated comic strip that are presented to the player. The reviews that we have, design-wise and visual-wise, and even the environment and the themes of each area was being positive from our players. So at least
that's awesome.
We have that.
So your game is released to Steam right now. From what I saw, it's ported to a couple different things already, right? I mean, it's on Switch at this point, correct? Or it's going to Switch? Is that what it is?
It runs on Switch.
I see,
we actually do all the performance tests on the Switch.
Yeah.
So it will be there on Switch. It will be on the Xbox too.
As an Xbox game, you need to go through an approval status. They give you the dev kit so you can port it. But for your game and for other indie games, because I see indie games that come up on Game Pass, and always in the back of my mind, I wonder how did they get there? Like how does that process go? And I'm pretty sure from the research that I've done that Xbox needs to come to you, and then they offer you a deal through Game Pass. For you specifically, as somebody who's gone through the process of getting your game on Xbox, do you have any knowledge on that, like on how that works, on how that breaks down when you're trying to approach something like that?
So I can tell you what is online or what is public. So you can pitch it. The most common thing that happens is actually the Microsoft people reach out with a deal. Yeah.
I always wondered the deals they give developers for something like Game Pass, right? Because they're just giving you a flat out deal for it. You're not getting a cut of like how many downloads they get or something like that. That's not how that works. So I always wondered how lucrative that actually is for a developer and how fair that split line is, like how much revenue Xbox is making versus how much revenue the developer is making.
What I'm aware of is that they give you a fixed amount, like you said, and see if you in X years you think you can do that amount of sales. But for instance, if it's a game like Stellar Interface, if they offer me any value, basically, I probably will put the game on Game Pass just for the exposure that it has.
Yeah, with Steam and with like porting your game to base Xbox. I mean, you can see where people are downloading, you can see all of those analytics. I'd imagine that still crosses over with Game Pass. Like you're still able to see your analytics on your back end. So even if it's not performing optimally the way you would want, you can still key in on the demos that are hitting and buying your game. So you can still market directly to them ultimately, even outside of Game Pass.
I was surprised by the cost of making a physical edition.
Oh, you guys... Oh, that's true, yeah, because it's Switch and Xbox. Yeah. So you guys do have a physical version, don't you?
Still on the...
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's gotta feel good though, right?
Yeah. One of the best temptations I ever had was opening the dev box that the publisher sent me with this.
No, I get that. That's got to have a great feeling to it. Having like a physical copy of what you've created. Yeah, I love that. That's awesome. But you're right. Production cost is does definitely affect things. So
it's scary. The economics of making this is very scary.
Luckily, that didn't happen when Series X and PS5 were coming out. I mean, we had shortages, but inflation wasn't quite as advanced as it is now. I imagine that would have pushed back the shortages even further than the 3 years or whatever it was that those things were barely on the shelves.
I saw my first PS5 on the store 2 months ago or 3 months ago, something like that. Yeah.
I mean, for me, it was
much to the store.
Yeah, that's fair.
But even so, it was this year that I saw the first PS5 on sale.
I saw a Series X and a PS5 on a shelf in a store in late 2022, and I remember when I saw it, I like stopped and I was like, whoa, they're actually in stock now. This is crazy. Like, because before, I mean, they were like mythical. You couldn't find them anywhere, you know? You'd be in like waiting queues trying to get these things. I just remember spamming the button trying to buy it, and like it would be like loading. You'd be like, come on, fucking load, and then it would like, sold out, they're gone. I'm like, son of a. So it was like they just couldn't make them fast enough, and people were just buying them up. It also kind of hurt it that people were buying 50 of them at a time and then just like selling them for insane prices online. So that didn't help either. But you're on the technical side of it. When you're creating a console, I'd imagine you have like a specific backlog of hardware, right, to create these things. Maybe they didn't account for how popular it was going to be, but I know it's extremely technical to make something like this. You can't just whip them out like it's nothing. But wouldn't you anticipate having that level of demand where you would create enough of them to be able to supply that and then cushion you so you can keep making them moving forward? Like, that never made sense to me. The supply would just not meet the demand in that drastic of a fashion for both. I mean, for Xbox and PlayStation, like neither of them were ready, and it was just insanely obvious that neither of them were ready for their launch.
That's not nothing to do what I do. But I study why did that happen, and it's basically, I can be wrong, by the way, but it's basically because nowadays, for instance, if you want to build a car, you have like the parts for the next day, and everything else for the day after that, they are in shipment. Okay, so if you disrupt that, which what happened with COVID, right? You basically only have parts for one day, and that is true for every piece of everything that is industrialized nowadays. Everything that you need, you only have exactly the stuff that you need to work today, but after that you don't have any parts. So if there is some supply chain disruption, everything shuts down.
Yeah.
And what happened with COVID was exactly that. The raw materials, we couldn't collect them, so everything shut down. And I think there is a lot of people that took advantage of this. I'm sure that there were a lot more PlayStations and Xboxes and Nvidia cards and whatever, and CPUs that they were telling us that they had. I'm pretty sure of that.
Circling all the way back to your game, right? Your game released in early access. So what is the roadmap moving forward, right? What is November look like? What's December look like? Even going into 2024, like what is that roadmap for you?
The roadmap that we really want is working on our west area 5, which is the control area, and that should end, if everything goes well, in January. In February or March, the console release.
While I have you on call, I want to ask you this, because you're a software engineer, right? I mean, you do a lot of that stuff. So all this AI stuff that's coming out right now, right? And I've been hearing a lot of people saying you can use AI to do coding, to do back-end work, all that sort of thing nowadays. Like, it can write its own. And like, I'm hearing people talk about, like, maybe one day AI can like just create their own games. Like, we don't even need developers anymore. And you as a software engineer, I mean, you know this stuff better than anybody. So what are your thoughts on that?
I would love to have that right now. I couldn't make a single line of code. Awesome. That would be perfect. I think that personally, I won't live enough to see that happen. AI can probably get rid of a bunch of, let's say, low-end jobs, basically the grunt work that we have to do every day. And in some way, tools like Copilot and even the software that we use to produce software already does that. I have a bunch of software that just I input what I'm trying to do, and it already fills a bunch of stuff for me. And I need full replacing software engineers, architects, the entire spectrum of development and application, a site and a website where you need to do database, we need to do a front end, we need to do the back end.
Yeah.
I don't think that I will live enough to see that. I've tried a bunch of those, and I can see it, but it's a possibility, because if you ask me about something like the ChatGPT 3 years ago, I said, you are mad. That's never going to happen in 2 years.
It's impressive,
so
what it can do.
Technology is fun because of this, because we never know when the next breakthrough will come. So
hey, 20 years ago,
awesome.
iPhone was crazy. Nowadays, look where we are, right? Yeah. So as a software engineer, right, I hear all this doomsday stuff. AI is going to take over humanity and end the world. What do you think?
I also love sci-fi and a good conspiracy theory. From what I know about the systems that are being built, we are okay. But again, technology changes. We don't know what they are right now. Never. It's just what I say, hysteria, pure hysteria. And I think that happens on every major breakthrough.
There's a cool story I saw where it's like when radio first came out, right? When FM radio came out, and people were saying it was taking people's souls or whatever, and like, it was this like evil thing. And it's looking back on that to looking at AI now, I guess we really haven't changed too much in like how we approach technology, right?